Then we'll take the frame with this longest part facing you. So by that, I mean these pieces are all about the same length, but this one is longer, so it'll be facing me. And then we'll get our bed and y-axis parts. And I'm going to set our bed a little further away for a minute while we pull this out, because there's a few things we have to do first. We're going to work on this largest plate first, so we'll keep that handy. I'll take out my bag of screws. You notice again, this is quite a big one, so we've got lots that we have to do here. So I'll take that bag of screws out. And at this point, we'll take out the motor and the motor bracket and just set them aside. And we're also going to take out our tensioner assembly for the y-axis, set it aside, and the other parts are just the belt and the tensioner screws for the bed, which we will show you how those go on later, so for now leave those in the bag. Alright, now I'm going to take our bag of screws, dump those carefully on the table. Now there's a lot of parts in here, so be careful. Make sure we got them all out. You can set that aside as well. And maybe what we'll do is, well, first of all, we'll go ahead and just set aside our V pulley bolts, our V groove bolts. We have some springs in here for our bed. Those things are kind of squirrely, so I like to put them back in the bag at first here. We'll take our spacers. We've got some plastic ones. We'll put those next to this longest black bolt. We have just our regular smooth spacers and our adjustable spacer. We have two of those actually. We'll take out our 4 long screws. So again, you see how I'm just setting everything up that I can see are the same size or a similar part, so that I can just grab them when I need them. It also kind of organizes so I can see things. I'm going to put these 2 washers over there because I know they go with our long bolts. We have the nuts that hold the pulley assemblies on here. We'll put them over here. There should be another one. There it is. That bolt's the same size. We have this little plastic bracket. Show you what that's for. What do you like to roll around on this table? You got some bigger short screws there. Here's some that are the same size. We have some small ones. We have a couple of these special kind of rail nuts. Some people call them T-nuts, some call them rail nuts. But that is what is going to allow us to put some things inside the frame. And I think now we're pretty close to having everything grouped. So it takes a little time. What did that take? Maybe a minute? But then we're fairly organized and we can go ahead and start working on things. So we'll start with this plate because that's going to use the most of our parts. It'll help get rid of some things off of here. We know, I know that little micro switch goes with that plastic thing. I'll show you that in a minute. But for right now, we're going to go ahead and assemble our Y-axis bed holder. And that's going to go on top of the frame here. And that's what allows the bed to slide back and forth on the frame. So we'll put this together first. Hopefully it didn't just mess up our angles. I'm going to start out by taking one of our big screws. I'm going to hold this thing up. And I'm going to poke that through one of the holes on the outside. There's 4 holes. We have one here that are just regular size holes. And we have our 2 adjusting holes over on this side. The other holes are for different things. So we'll poke that through one of those. We're going to take a regular smooth spacer, put that over. Then we're going to put on our V pulley groove belt, or V pulley, and then a lock nut. Alright, that's the first one. Then we'll go ahead and get another and do the same with the next small bolt, that hole. And we'll take another smooth spacer, put that on, our V pulley, and then our lock nut. So again, we're just getting things started. We'll tighten everything up once we get it where we know we want it. Then we'll take another long bolt, and this time we're going to put it through one of the big holes. We want the two that are in line with each other, that are the furthest out. So I'll put one of our bolts through that hole. We'll put one of our cam locks with the longest part going down. We'll put a V pulley and then a lock nut, or then a washer rather, sorry, I forgot the washers on these ones, and then a lock nut. And we do that again for our last one. So we take our long bolt, we'll get through that last big hole, take our spacer with the widest part down, a V pulley, and a washer, and then we put on our lock nut. Now, I need to point out here, one of our lock nuts, still a lock nut, but it's smaller than the others. It's got a black inside instead of a purple. But that goes with this big long screw over here. So once I have all those started, I'll go ahead and tighten those up. So I use my hand wrench and my Allen wrench. Make sure they all spin, which they do. And then I'm going to put the wide part on the right and the skinny part on the left. And we're going to slide that over the top groove right here in our extrusion, aluminum extrusion. I'm going to poke that in and slide it on until it goes on. Alright, and you see how that slides smoothly along that top frame. Now our bed is going to sit on top of that, but we need this assembly and our tensioner and some other parts in the back all assembled and ready before we can go on with our adding our bed and some other things. So that's all it takes for that plate. We'll set that aside, and I'm going to assemble part of my motor. So I get my Y motor, and it says Y right there down on the bottom. I think on some of them I even marked it on the back. We want that connector to point down, and on our plate then, down is going to be opposite of this notch. So I'm going to put this plate on with the notch, this angled notch at the top left, and then the connector is at the bottom. Connector's at the bottom, angled plate here on the left, and on the left when I'm looking at it. And then I'm going to get my screws and tighten those screws on to hold the frame. So I'll just set that down. I'll take 4 of my smaller screws with my Allen wrench, put that in one of the holes, get it started. And I'm doing that with all of them. I'm just getting them started. Now these holes are a little bit slotted. I'll show you one here in a minute. But what that means is it allows us to move this up or down depending on if we need to raise or lower that motor later. So that's handy. For right now we're just going to kind of get it in there and clamp it in one position, and then later we'll decide if we need to adjust. So I'm just taking 4 of my small screws. I'm going to get those started, and then I want to kind of pull that down until the round part of my motor is kind of centered inside the big hole on the plate. And we'll go ahead and snug that down, and I'll show it to you here in a second. So we pull that down. In fact, maybe if we snug them down a little more, we can adjust that more and it'll stay in place. So I'm not going tight at all, just kind of snug. Move this. Well, must have got one of them really tight. There we go, so we can still move it. So I move it all the way up so that the bracket is hitting the bottom of that. And then I pull it back until it looks to me like it's about centered in there. Hold it in place, and then we'll go ahead and snug them up. Now, the pulley on this motor is a press fit pulley. You can't take it off without heating it up or having a special tool to pull it off. So that one stays where it is. We don't have to do any kind of adjustment. But we do need two of our little half pulleys. And what I mean by that is one of the edges doesn't have the little lip on it, and the other side does. So I need two of those, and we're going to put them together like this with a long enough bolt that it'll go through and hold both of those in place. And this becomes what they call an idler pulley that the belt rubs against as the motor spins, but it helps keep tension on the belt without wearing the belt. We're going to take that assembly and put on this long lug and get it started. And then we'll go ahead and take our Allen wrench and snug that down as well. Now, you don't have to make that one super tight because there is an adjustment we may have to do later, but now you see how that works. We have that pulley that catches the belt. Now, I just told you that wrong. I guess we should have done that later. So we're going to remove that real quick. We'll still leave it assembled, but it makes it harder to put our bolts in that hold this whole assembly to the frame. So we'll do that first without that in the way. So we'll just set that aside for a second. Now, we have this little black plate, and we have this other stop switch. Okay, this is called a stop switch. It's just a micro switch that has an on-off position, has a connector for a wire. That needs to fit on this assembly so that when the bed goes too far back, it stops. So we're going to hold the plate so that we have these grooves in it facing up. Then we'll take our micro switch, and the reason it has the grooves is so these soldered areas that stick down a little below the board have a place to go. So I'm going to set that over those, and you see it fits down nice and flat there. And then I'm going to take two of my last two smallest screws, and I'm going to screw that assembly to the plate. Now these are tiny little screws, and they're going against our connector a little bit, so we want to get them started, get them about 2/3 of the way down. Then we'll do the other one, which is our last small screw. Get it started, and once it's started good, then you go ahead and snug it down. Now again, I'm not trying to break it, just snug it. Okay, and then we'll come to this side just to make sure it's snug down. Alright, and that should be how it looks. This little micro switch then becomes what stops our Y-axis, and our connector will come out the back. So we'll set that aside. We'll set our motor aside. We'll set our pulley assembly aside. Now we're ready to assemble part of our Y belt tensioner. So we'll take this bracket, our longest black bolt. There's only one. And I'm going to put that in the hole at the top here with one of my plastic spacers. Just poke it in part way like that. Then we take our other two half bearings, put them so they face each other, and we're going to put those in next onto the bolt. And I like to stick the bolt out a little ways so I know where it is, and I'm going to put that other plastic spacer on there, and then tip it forward carefully and finish pushing it through. I'm trying to do this so you can see it. And then we take our small lock washer and we'll tighten that on the end here. So that gets us started. Now, this is the only nut that doesn't have a tool for it in your toolbox. So I use my pliers. It would probably be better to go get a socket or something that fit that the right size. And I'm going to hold that while I screw this in a little bit with my Allen wrench. I want to go till it's just snug, but not super tight. I want my pulleys to still be able to spin, but I don't want any side-to-side slack. Alright, so that's our Y-axis tensioner, and I'm going to move some of these other parts over here out of the way a little ways so that we can bring our frame in now. And what we'll do is on the front of the longest part there, there's some holes drilled in right there at the front, so I want to make sure that these slots line up with those holes. So I'm going to slide that over a little. Now if you tighten it too much, and it looks like I may have a little, it won't slide over very easy. If you did it right, it'll have a little tension and kind of stay there. Then I'm going to take one of my longer screws, poke in there and just kind of get it started. Do the same with another one. Okay, then I'm going to flip that around, get the ones over here started. Do it again for the other one. Then I'm going to snug those up a ways. I don't want it tight yet. Just kind of up, barely touching the plate. Same on this side. And the other one. Now you'll notice that I can adjust this quite a ways in or out, and that's what allows us to tension our Y belt. But we've got a few other things to do before we do that. So we're going to spin this whole frame around now so we can work on the back end of it. So if you need to, you can slide that up out of your way a little ways. And we're going to install our Y-axis motor assembly. Now there's three kind of fat short screws. They're going to go in these two outer holes and the bottom inner hole. So I'm going to put that inner one in first. It's a little easier now than when you're trying to do it on. Take my Allen wrench and I'm going to line that up with the hole in the frame down here, that hole right there, and tighten this up a little bit. Then I'll take one of the other ones, put it on my Allen wrench, kind of hold it with my finger, line up with our bottom hole, spin that till we get it started. Then we do the same with our last one. Okay, we get all of them started good and kind of snug up to the frame. We want the top of our frame mount, and it kind of does this naturally, flush right here. That means it's level. And then we'll go ahead and snug that. So if you need to, kind of wiggle it And these ones want to be fairly snug. You don't want to like strip them, but make them pretty tight, because this holds your whole y-axis and you don't want it to like get loose or it'll throw everything off. Now we can go ahead and put in our pulley assembly. So I'll go ahead and put that on my Allen wrench, hold everything together, get it in the hole with that big lug, and go ahead and snug that up. And I'll make that one snug but not super tight, because I may have to loosen that again later. That leaves us our micro switch. So we're going to put that micro switch down here on the bottom of this assembly. So I take these special T-nuts, and the reason they're special is because they have little grooves cut in them so that they'll turn inside the frame and lock in, and they won't pull out. I'm going to take those two T-nuts and poke those in first. We'll go ahead and put the T-nuts in, and you have to get them in kind of flat with those grooves facing you. But once they're in, we can kind of slide them one way or the other to get them where we need them. I'm going to take one of the leftover bolts, put it through the plastic frame. The head goes the same side as the board. I'm going to line that up with one of the T-nuts on my wrench and just get it started. Okay, then I'm going to do the same with the other one. Now you notice that whole thing just fell out with the T-nut assembled. So we'll put it back and line it up with our other T-nut and get it tight started. Now I want to slide that back until it goes about as far as it goes, and I'm going to start tightening the back one first. So go back as far as you can, then start turning that T-nut, and then push it up against the frame. Oh, didn't work like it was supposed to. The T-nut should turn inside the frame and go up like that and lock in. If yours isn't working, then you may have to loosen the screws a ways and then try again. There, that time it worked. Right, so I'm going to do that with the front one, loosen it a little so it'll go back, and then start to tighten it, and that'll turn it. Don't tighten it all the way quite yet, because once that's tight, we want to pull that all the way back and then kind of tilt the front so that it's parallel to our top piece. And then we'll go ahead and snug that down inside the frame and then tighten it up a little more. Okay, now go snug, but don't break it. So about like that. That way when this bed comes back, hits our switch, it stops the assembly from moving. Now that we have our table on, our table support I guess, our motor, our idler wheels, we can go ahead and put the belt on. So we'll take the belt out of the package. You notice the end of the belt has a little brass coupling crimp to it. That's a real handy way of doing it. I've done other printers where they didn't have assembly as good as this, and it was a pain to work on. So what we're going to do is feed our belt through that little square hole in the back underneath our idler pulley. It's going to go all the way through this big 40mm extrusion and come out inside there, and then we'll wrap it around our pulleys and go around from there. So I'll start with this end because it looks like it's going to be the easiest way to do it. I want the teeth up. I take one of those brass ferrules and I'm just going to feed the belt through that square hole in the bracket, and I'm just going to feed it until it comes out. Now if it gets stuck on one of the screws, you might have to turn it on its end or something like this So the gravity will help you. In fact, that looks like it's working. And I want it to come out till I see it on this end, which I do right here. Then I'll take that brass ferrule, teeth facing up still. I'm going to push that up through the hole next to the bearings, and then I'm going to line it up so that the pulley goes over that bearing. And before I pull this all the way out the back, so I have quite a bit left here, I'm going to wrap that around the motor. So that's what I'm doing back here. So that wraps around the motor right there. This bearing right here just helps keep things lined up with the motor. I'm going to pull this back, and I want to slide this ferrule into that groove. So let me show you how I did that. So I just kind of hold it by the ferrule, turn it, and turn it so that it locks in to that little slot on the top of the bed. Then I'll pull this, make sure I'm engaged with my back pulley, pull that forward, and I want that to engage, so I have to slide my adjuster forward so I have enough slack. And I'm going to do the same thing. Grab it by the ferrule, kind of turn it so it goes in the groove, and turn it so it goes in the groove. Then I'll pull my adjuster forward a little and just make sure that's tight there and over the pulley on this end. And then we'll show you how this looks on this end. Right, so what we want to do next is tension our belt so there's hardly any play in it. Right now it's really loose, and we don't want any play in it. In fact, we want it a little tighter than most people think we ought to do it, but we find out later in a YouTube tutorial I watched that the tighter the better. We don't want to bust it, but we want to get it nice and snug. I'm going to slide that back, kind of grab it here, pull back, and then tighten my front screw just a little bit on the adjuster. And I do that again on the other side front screw. I call it the front screw because it's front on the adjuster. Now I'm kind of pulling back on the adjuster as I go. Snug up both those front screws just a little, not super tight, but enough that it can't move. Then I'm going to watch this pulley as I move my bed, and I want the pulley to stay smooth in the center of those gears. Okay, that's how I know that this is parallel to the frame. If I pull it and it goes over against this pulley, then I know it's not parallel and it's going to wear the edges of my belt. I also want to look at this pulley. Remember I told you we might have to adjust that? If we pull that and it goes over and hits against the edge of our frame, which it looks like this one may be a little bit, then we may have to adjust that a little more. I'm going to just try snugging it up first because we're not very far off, and I didn't tighten that very tight in the beginning. So that is off just a little, so I loosened the three frame bolts here, the three bracket bolts for the Y motor, and I twisted that up slightly. And that way as I slide forward and back now, it doesn't hit the frame or the edge of the bearing. So I'll go ahead and tighten that in place. Just tightening my three big frame screws now. And I'll adjust, I'll slide that to make sure they're not going to hit. Looks like we're pretty good there. We're staying in the center of our pulley now. Now we'll go ahead and spin it around one last time and check our front adjustment. Looks like we're staying in the center there. We're fairly snug, but not very tight. So we're going to pull this down. Remember how we just snugged the front one but not the back one? So we're just tilting down to make that super tight. Then we'll snug that bolt up in the other bolt. We'll snug the other bolt up on our adjuster, snug it again, and then retest and see if that stays in between the two pulleys as we go forward and back, and it looks like we do. That's one of the tests that they have you do, and one of the adjustments that they have you make to tune your printer. At this point, I do want to adjust my bed so there's no side-to-side looseness or any wiggles side to side. If I push on the corners, I don't want it to move at all. I'm going to loosen one and show you what it looks like if that happens. This one we got kind of lucky on, so I'm going to spin this around to where I have the two hexagon cam lock bolts, and we're going to loosen by holding the bottom nut with my wrench and the top with my Allen wrench. I'm going to loosen that and turn it, and you can see it makes it loose. So I don't want anything loose like that happening. So I'm going to turn the cam lock. So I want to just barely crack this to where it's barely loose. So snug it up until it just barely starts to kind of snug up again. Okay, notice it's still got some play. I'm going to take the big end of my wrench, put underneath there, and connect it to that hexagon cam lock in there. And I'm going to turn that until I don't have any play. Okay, now you don't want to do too tight or it'll catch as it goes down. But I'm going to go until it doesn't have any play, so we don't have any side to side or up and down movement. And then I'll go ahead and tighten my bolt. And that will make our bed nice and solid, give us a good solid foundation so it won't move and cause weird prints. Right, so I'm going to double check that, and remember we didn't tighten both of these, so this one feels like it's pretty good already, so I'm going to just snug it up. If it was still loose in the back, I would go ahead and tighten it up like I just showed you on the other one with the hex cam lock. Okay, so snug that up and then wiggle it, and you want it to slide. You don't want it to catch anywhere. If you feel it kind of bump, then you got a problem. But if I just go forward and back, everything's nice and tight from stop to stop. Wiggle it, wiggle it. I check to make sure I'm still in my bearings. And it looks like that one might be off slightly. So I'm going to loosen my two big ones, or my three big ones, one more time. And make sure that I can turn this. As I turn it that way, I want it to stay. So by adjusting this left or right, I can get it to stay more in the center of that groove. And I'll snug it up. And then retest. Okay, double check for wiggle. Looks like we're good everywhere. So with that all assembled, now we're ready to install the bed. So we'll turn this to this point. I'll get the bed out of my box. And on the back of the bed, there's a few things I want to show you. We have 4 bolts sticking out. That's the ones that hold it on. Now, on the top of the plate, we have this magnetic material that they've sprayed on, and you can see how the heads of the bolts they're trying to poke out of it. Okay, that's part of the reason you get some inconsistencies actually. What we want to do is take our springs out of our bag now. Carefully you don't drop them because they ricochet all over. You should have 4 of them, so I've already lost one. There it is. And we're going to put those over the holes on the bed here carefully. We're going to do the front 2 and the back right one. The left one goes underneath this plastic piece, and we'll go ahead and put that there. And while we have this, these are the 2 heavy wires that heat the bed. These 2 black wires are a temperature sensor, and they just tape that to the bottom so they can tell what temperature the bed's getting. So we'll go ahead and poke that hole through, and that kind of helps hold that spring in place because the other 3 are kind of a challenge. So we're going to flip this whole thing over. Try to keep your wire from knocking your springs off. We're going to get it lined up with our back spring. Kind of get it in that hole. And then we'll lower it down on the 2 front springs. And get it in those holes. So now our bed kind of wiggles back and forth, up and down like that. Then we take our bed leveler wheels and we want to put that so that this little thing in the middle pokes up onto each one of our bolts. Okay, same with this one. Be sure not to cross thread it. You should be able to spin it on by hand nice and easy. Alright, then we'll come over and do our other back one. Then I like to screw each one of them in a little ways just so that it isn't going to wiggle itself loose. Alright, then we can go ahead and push that back to the stop, and we've completed that part of the bed assembly. We still have the magnetic mat to go on top. We'll put that on later. Next we're going to work on putting our motherboard on with some of our wires. That's the reason we needed this one available. We have the wires for the heated bed as well as the temperature that goes into the motherboard.